Welcome to the Las Vegas Review-Journal Judicial Primary Debates. Here's your host, Steve Sebelius.
Welcome to the Review-Journal's Judicial Debate. I'm Steve Sebelius. Tonight we're going to be talking with candidates for District Court in Department 24. We'll be joined by 3 of the 5 candidates in this race. 2 of our candidates declined to participate in tonight's debate. So joining us tonight, Michael Bohn, an attorney in private practice. He owns his own firm. He served on the State Bar's Disciplinary Committee and the Judicial Discipline Commission. Dan Gilliam, an attorney in private practice, who's a former assistant city attorney for the city of Henderson and practices in the area of criminal defense. And Joe Vadala, a special counsel with the Nevada Attorney General's Office, who once served in the Peace Corps in Albania and handled all the eminent domain cases related to the recently completed Project Neon. So he is a very busy man, obviously. We're going to start with opening statements from each of our candidates for 1 minute, and then we'll be asking questions of each candidate with answers 1 minute each. We go in alphabetical order. So Mr. Bohn, it's to you.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, my name is Mickey Bohn. First, I want to say that I hope all people watching this are safe and healthy and are staying safe and healthy in these trying times. I moved to Las Vegas 50 years ago in 1970 when I was 11 years old. I went to college and law school out of state, and I graduated law school in 1983, and I moved to Las Vegas in 1984. I was fortunate to get a job working for Judge Miriam Shearing. I saw how important a job a judge was and how tough it was, but I realized it's something I wanted to do as soon as I had the right experience. And after 36 years of practicing law, I have that experience. I've got over 10,000 hours of courtroom time. I've handled over 100 trials. I've appeared before over 100 different judges. I've handled over 300 appeals to the state and federal courts, which have resulted in 19 published decisions becoming binding case law in Nevada. I've also been a court-appointed arbitrator for over 25 years. It's this extensive experience that sets me, Mickey Bohn, apart from the other candidates for Department 24. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Mr. Gilliam.
Thank you, Steve, very much. And thank you, folks, for watching. And as Mr. Bohn said, hope everyone's staying safe and healthy out there. So as billed, my name is Dan Gilliam. I'm from Ohio. I went to The Ohio State University and got my bachelor's degree in education, my master's degree in education, and my law degree. When I finished law school, I moved out to Las Vegas to make it my home, and I've been practicing here ever since. I started off my career at the Clark County Public Defender's Office, where I represented individuals charged with a variety of things from misdemeanors to felonies. At that time, I decided I was going to spend 2.5 years there, and then I moved to the city of Henderson, where I was a prosecutor, where I prosecuted mainly domestic violence and DUI charges. I actually spent a lot of time at the Henderson Police Academy teaching new recruits all about probable cause, search and seizure, and DUI investigations. About 5 years ago, I decided to leave the city and open up my own practice, which I did. Now I do criminal defense. I am the criminal defense attorney for Bighorn Law, which is a PI firm in town, but all I do is their crim work. I'm looking forward to being the next judge in Department 24. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. And finally, Mr. Vadala.
Thank you, Steve. And let me introduce myself with a very personal story. I've been an attorney for 24 years, but there are some gaps in my legal career. I served 2 years in the United States Peace Corps, as you mentioned, and I also spent a number of years living in Germany. Let me tell you why. In 2008, I had a great job and was living with the love of my life, Sebastian, a German natural. Unfortunately for us, he couldn't get a spousal visa because the law wouldn't recognize our relationship at that time. It was a nightmare situation. We had no easy answer. We either split up, leave the country, or try to stay illegally. And even though I disagreed with the law, we did leave the country because at my core, I believe the rule of law must be respected. Now, the good news is the law changed, and in 2014, we were able to return to the US legally. And for 6 years, I've been working at the Nevada Attorney General's Office, where I get to represent the people of this great state, and Sebastian is now a US citizen. Together, we also own a small vegan deli here in town. I share this very personal story because it demonstrates my utmost respect for the rule of law, even when it comes at great personal cost. I supported groups trying to get the law changed, but until it was, I respected the law. That is who I am, and that is what voters deserve in a district court judge.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. We're going to jump right in with our first question. It's going to go to Mr. Mickey Bohn first, and that is this. In plain English, tell us your judicial philosophy.
Well, very simply, a judge is supposed to follow the law. In cases where the law is not clear, a judge is supposed to do a little research into the law. Look at what the legislative intent is, see if there's some minutes or history in the legislature, read what other writers have written about it, see if there's laws from other states with similar language that have had decisions based on them. That's what a judge is supposed to do. You're supposed to stick with the law and decide, like Joe said, based on the rule of the law.
Thanks, sir. We appreciate it. Mr. Gilliam.
So my philosophy with regards to how a courtroom should be run and what I'm going to do is going to be based entirely on fairness. I believe that every party that comes before me has a need to be heard, and I'm going to be the one that hears what they have to say. I'm going to take all the arguments into consideration, and I'm going to apply the law as it is written to make a very good decision that may not make everyone in the courtroom happy. But what I do hope is everyone that leaves that courtroom will say, hey, Judge Gilliam was very, very fair with the way that he handed down his ruling. And that's going to be the philosophy that I use every day when I'm elected.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Mr. Vadala, your judicial philosophy in plain English words.
Sure. My judicial philosophy will be the exact same philosophy I bring to the Attorney General's office every day as a public servant. It's a philosophy that was given to me 25 years ago by my mentor, Frankie Sue Del Papa, when she was the Attorney General. She said, Joe, when you're a public servant, you have a duty to just do the right thing. Not the convenient thing, not the easy thing, but the right thing. But in doing it, you have to follow the law, not your emotions and not the law the way you wish it was. You can't rewrite it, and you don't legislate from the bench, but you follow the law. And lastly, you treat everybody with dignity and respect. And that's what someone coming into a Vadala courtroom can expect.
Sounds good. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with questions and answers for candidates, District Court, Department 24.
Alexa, play my flash briefing.
Here's what's new in today's news.
Stay in the loop of the latest information in the Las Vegas Valley with the Las Vegas Review-Journal Flash Briefing. Every day, we will provide you with everything you need to know in news, business, weather, entertainment, and sports. Go to the Alexa app and search LVRJ News Briefing. Then say, Alexa, play my flash briefing to hear 3 minutes of the most important information in Las Vegas.
The Vegas Nation podcast is your source for all of your Las Vegas Raiders news. Subscribe and get fast takes and smart coverage. Download the Vegas Nation app and check out vegasnation.com to stay up to date with your Las Vegas Raiders.
Welcome back to the Review Journal's Judicial Debate. We're talking with candidates for District Court, Department 24. Our next question to Mr. Gilliam, what problems do you believe you might encounter in moving from an advocate for a private client, or in some cases a government agency, to your new role as a neutral judge?
Well, quite frankly, I won't have any problems doing that. I understand my role as an advocate now as a criminal defense attorney. I understood my role as a prosecutor in Henderson for almost 8 years, and I will naturally understand my role as judge in Department 24. And so we can kind of pretty seamlessly go from job to job and understand the requirements of those jobs. And that's not going to be any different for me when I become judge in Department 24. I will have to obviously reorganize kind of the way that I handle things. However, I treat my clients fairly. I treat DAs fairly. When I was a prosecutor, I treated defense attorneys fairly. And so I'm going to have that same temperament when I become judge in Department 24.
Mr. Vadala, you're any problems you foresee going from an advocate for the people to a neutral judge?
Not at all, Steve. At the Nevada Attorney General's office, our goal is to seek justice, and that is what we do. I have a client, the Department of Transportation, but unlike an attorney in private practice, my goal isn't to win a case. My goal is to be fair, fair to both sides. And so when I have an eminent domain case, the duty is that the landowner be paid just compensation. And that means a fair amount. My goal isn't to try to pay the least amount, it's to be fair. And that's exactly the same position that I'll have as a judge.
All right, Mr. Bohn, any problems you foresee in transitioning from a private attorney to a neutral judge?
No, none whatsoever. I mentioned earlier, I got a job working for Judge Miriam Shearing 36 years ago. And since that time, my goal has been to become a judge. And I've watched over 100 judges and how they've handled their courtrooms. And I know how a judge is supposed to act. I know how a judge is supposed to treat the people that come in front of him. I know how a judge is supposed to rule. I also have all these appeals to the Supreme Court, so I know what they expect when a case goes up for review. So I know what's expected of a judge. I've been practicing this for 36 years, and I'll have no problem whatsoever transitioning to a seat on the bench. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. We'll move on to our next question. Mr. Vadala, you get this one first. Do you think all citizens currently have equal access to legal help and the justice system? And what role or what could you do in the role of judge to help people access justice?
Yeah, unfortunately, the answer to that is no. I don't think that everybody has equal access to justice because litigation is very expensive and not everyone can afford that. It's unfortunate, and as a judge, there's not a whole lot that you can do because, again, you're not an advocate for either side. But what we can do is we can encourage attorneys to do more pro bono work. You know, I was very honored last year with 2019. I was named the Nevada Legal Services Government Pro Bono Attorney of the Year, and as a judge, I will certainly encourage that in my courtroom. Anything that I can do to encourage attorneys to take more pro bono cases to try to gain more access to the citizens, I will certainly.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Mr. Bohn.
Again, I agree with Mr. Vadala there. Litigation is expensive and most people cannot afford attorneys when they need them. There are services available, but there's never enough. There are you can get help at the Civil Law Center. You could also get information off of Google. The court website has a lot of good information and forms and such. I do believe that attorneys should do more pro bono work. It's very satisfying to do so. And as a judge, I would also encourage mediation and settlements because oftentimes you have people come to court who don't have an attorney and they cannot represent themselves properly. So I would just recommend parties go to mediation where a neutral third-party judge can have both sides work on a fair and just resolution.
All right. And Mr. Gilliam, what do you think? Access to justice and what can a judge do?
There's a little bit of a difference between access to the legal system and equal access to justice, which is what you had just touched on, Stephen. So most certainly, if I become judge, everyone is going to have equal access to justice in Department 24, whether they have an attorney or whether they are pro se. And it won't matter to me how good their attorneys are. That individual and those individuals before me are going to have equal access to justice. The problem is, how do they get that access through the legal system? Because not everyone, as both Mr. Bohn and Mr. Vadala said, not everyone has the funds to hire an attorney to guide them through the process. And so there are, as was said, pro bono work can be done. There are, legal aid can be accessed. There's the Clark County Law Foundation that could certainly help. Those are all things that people need to do. As stated before, it's difficult for a judge to guide people in that direction because that's not really our role. However, those things are available to people if they just kind of look for the answers, and they'd be able to find them fairly easily. There are lots of people out there that do want to help.
All right. Thank you all for your answers. We appreciate it. We're going to take another quick break. We'll be back with Department 24 and District Court candidates, questions and answers still ahead.
For all your Raiders news, like us on Facebook, download the Vegas Nation app, and go to vegasnation.com.
All your listeners and followers, the best name of any podcast in the world is podcast.
Nobody's ever done it. Nobody's ever faked
Not that we know
death.
of.
No.
When you work with Prince, you got to get used to the fact that he changes musicians like underwear.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Tom Brady. And Tom Brady, he's a quarterback in the Boston area.
I'm not sure who you're talking about.
Welcome back to the Review Journal's Judicial Debate. We're speaking with candidates for District Court Department 24. This next question to Mr. Mickey Bohn. Is it ever appropriate, you think, for the reasons of judicial economy, to impose restrictions on which cases go to trial, such as mandatory mediation or settlement efforts?
I think, well, cases, the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to trial. The Nevada Supreme Court has made that clear. Mandatory mediation and settlement is always a good idea. More people don't realize, but less than 10% of the cases that are filed actually go to trial. Most of them are settled beforehand. A case has three parts. It's pretrial, trial, and the appeal. And it's what happens in the pretrial, in the motion calendar, the rulings of the judge that will help dictate if a case gets settled, how it gets settled, and what terms it gets settled on. But mandatory settlement is always a good idea because when you go to trial, one side always walks out unhappy, one side walks out happy. With mediation, both people walk out unhappy, but at least you know what you're getting. So I'm all for mediation and settlement.
All right, absolutely. Mr. Gilliam, what do you think about that? Any room for mandatory mediation settlement?
I have no problem with having mandatory settlement conferences, whether it's criminal or civil. As Mr. Bohn stated, very few cases that are filed actually go to trial. Our system would get pretty jammed up if everyone went to trial. And so we have these efforts in place to try and alleviate some of the court's calendars so that we can have these settlement conferences, so we can have these conferences between DAs and defense attorneys to try and get cases resolved. As Mr. Bohn said, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to be happy 100% of the time. However, whenever there's a settlement conference that goes as it's supposed to, whenever there's a negotiation between the state and the defendant, usually both parties are at least on some level pleased with the outcome. That's why both parties have accepted that. And so while I would never mandate that anyone be forced to go into a settlement conference and come out by settlement, or if it's a criminal case, come out with a negotiation, I would certainly encourage all the parties to engage in that to at least see if the cases can be worked out equitably.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Vadala, you mentioned working out settlements with regard to eminent domain, some thorny issues there. Should those talks be mandatory?
I definitely believe that we have to preserve the right to a jury trial always. And it's always helpful to sit down with somebody to help work through possible mediation or settlements. I've had cases that I really didn't think were going to settle. We're not going to resolve. And through effective mediation, did. And so I'm a big advocate, and I think it also helps, as we were talking about earlier, with the cost of litigation in trying to do it earlier rather than later.
Our next question goes to Mr. Gilliam first. Do you believe the composition of juries adequately and fairly represents society at large? And tell us why or why not.
Well, if you're going to look at the adequate representation of a jury, I think that should reflect the representation of the society itself. And just as an example, let's just say that 20% of Clark County residents are of Black descent. I think that 20% of the jury pool should be of Black descent as well. And that goes for the same for the Latino population, for the Asian American population, and also for the Caucasian population. I think it should be fairly represented. That way we can get kind of, I don't want a jury of all one type. I don't want an all-white jury. I don't want an all-female jury. There should be a collection of people that fairly represent the community, and those are the individuals that should be determining the fates of the cases before them.
All right, Mr. Vadala, what do you think about that?
Well, I would agree with Mr. Gilliam's statement regarding the jury pool. When it comes to an actual jury, there's a lot of reasons why you could end up with an all-female jury through peremptory challenges, and there's a lot that goes into that. But as a judge, I think that what's really important is that you make sure that there's nothing that shouldn't be happening going on in the selection of the jury, and that you are very understanding and sympathetic to the jurors, and you listen to them when they talk about hardships that they have, because I've seen jurors that have been forced to sit on juries that that doesn't help anybody in the long run if a juror doesn't want to be there and shouldn't be there.
Mr. Bohn, what do you think about that?
Well, the jury pool should reflect a good cross-section of society. But that's the jury pool. When it comes to jury selection, as a judge, you have to make sure that one particular type of juror is not being unfairly removed from the jury panel, and a judge has discretion over that. But there have been a number of cases reported over the years where certain attorneys will try to eliminate women or certain ethnic groups from there, and a judge should take care to make sure that society is properly represented, and if any one group is being removed, it should not be being removed improperly, so that the final jury selection should be a fair and balanced reflection of what we have in Clark County.
All right, thank you, sir. We appreciate it. We're going to take one final break in our debate for Clark County District Court, Department 24. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Review Journal's Judicial Debate. We're talking with candidates for District Court, Department 24. We've come to the end of our debate, which means we'll have closing statements from each candidate. We'll have 45 seconds from each candidate for a closing statement. We're going to go in reverse order that we did at the beginning, and that means we start with Mr. Vadala.
Thank you, Steve, and the Review Journal for this opportunity. You know, I introduced myself at the beginning of this with a very private story because I believe that in order for voters to make the best decision on who should be the next judge in Department 24, they need to truly understand who the candidates are and what drives them. I am a public servant. I served in the Peace Corps, as we mentioned. I did it often without water or electricity. And I currently work for the people of the state of Nevada. I'm not driven by profit, and I don't have my name on the door of a law firm. When you're a government lawyer, especially at the Nevada Attorney General's office, you have one goal, and that's to be fair by seeking justice. I'm ready to bring that same motivation to the district court. I have the relevant legal and life experience to handle such a great responsibility. Thank you, and everybody, please keep safe.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gilliam, your closing statement.
Thank you, Steve. So let me explain why I want to be judge. So in the 15 years that I've been practicing, again, half as prosecution, half as defense attorney, what I've come to conclude is that I want to keep my community safe. It starts off by wanting to keep your home safe and your wife safe and your kids safe. Once you get to know your neighbors, you want to keep them safe as well. As that has expanded for me, I now want to keep my community safe. And the best way that I can do that is to be your next judge in Department 24. So voting for Dan Gilliam is a vote for community safety. I have the experience to get there, and I have what it takes to do a good job and a fair job in that department. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. And finally, Mr. Mickey Bohn, your closing statement.
Thank you, Steve. I want to close again by hoping again that everybody out there stays safe in the situation we find ourselves in these days. You know, Albert Einstein said the only source of knowledge is experience. And without question, I am the most experienced candidate in this department. I practiced law twice as long as any of the other candidates. I've had my own law firm for 23 years. That alone is longer than the other candidates have ever practiced. I have more diverse experience in more areas of law. I've helped create law with 19 published cases in a wide variety of cases, including constitutional law, privilege, workers' compensation, personal injury, on and on and on. Real estate and HOAs. It's this why I, Mickey Bohn, am the best candidate for Department 24. Stay safe, and God bless America. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you to all the candidates. I appreciate your willingness to come on and answer questions. And thank you for watching. For the Las Vegas Review-Journal, I'm Steve Sebelius.